So 2024 election happened, didn't go great, but that's only at the top of the ticket and some places down ballot. But I did want to find some silver linings. So I wanted to basically share with you some of the good things I was able to see from the election based on some stuff I compiled. Here's one thing based on exit polls. And here's the thing you need to know about exit polls, which is that they're notoriously unreliable right now. We won't get good data on who voted what way, which groups voted which way for a few months. So these are exit polls. They're not necessarily reliable, but they're all we got right now. But look at this. When it comes to white evangelicals, 82% of them voted for Donald Trump. That's interesting. That's roughly what happened in 2016 and 2020. But I do want you to look at one thing. That represents 22% of voters. That top line right there. It represents 22% of voters. 4 years ago, they represented 28% of voters. So white evangelicals are very powerful. They're a very big block for the Republican Party, and they come out to vote for their dude because they do not actually care about anything Jesus taught. They just like the guy who panders to them and holds up a Bible, maybe upside down outside of a church after he uses gases to clean out protesters. So they're becoming a shrinking part of the population. That's interesting. Then look at this. This is how other people voted. Here we go. And I want to show you this. If you go all the way down here, nuns represent 24% of the population. These are the people who are atheists, agnostics, or who just don't identify with an organized religion, even if they believe in God. We are 24% of the population, and 71% of us voted for Kamala Harris. Why is that interesting? Well, it's because 4 years ago, we were only 65% of us voted for Joe Biden in 2020. So by representation, like a higher percentage of nuns voted for Democrats this time around than 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, we were 22% of voters. Now we're 24% of voters. So we are moving in the right direction. There's more of us. We are more aligned with the Democratic Party, not as much as white evangelicals with Republicans, but we're growing. I would love to see the breakdown for like atheists specifically. I have not seen those numbers yet, but I find that interesting. So that's one thing. So right now, religious conservatives seem to control every lever of the federal government. They're going to for years to come. It's very disturbing. We're going to have to play defense. But we, nuns, are becoming a growing part of the Democratic base. It would be nice then if Democrats started acting like it, with more targeted outreach to non-religious Americans. And I know that's hard because white evangelicals have a place you can go to, a leader you could speak to. We don't have that. Like, dear God, don't speak to Richard Dawkins to represent all of us, right? Based on the last story. But you could reach out to non-religious people without alienating everybody else by pushing back against Christian nationalism. We don't think someone's religion belongs in a public school. You could defend church-state separation at every level because religious freedom means religious freedom for everybody. They could start using that language a lot more instead of shying away from it, which is what most of them do now. So that's one thing. So with that in mind, here's a question. Were there any openly non-religious candidates, not nuns, not the people who are like, well, I believe in some higher power. No, forget them. Were there any explicitly non-religious candidates who ran for state-level office, state Senate, state House, or for Congress? Were there any? How many, rhetorical question here, how many do you think there were who ran for office? On the ballot this past November, this past week, how many of them were on the ballot and they were like atheist candidates for office? What do you think the number is? Maybe a dozen? Couple dozen? I actually have that answer for you because along with the Center for Free Thought Equality, which is a political action committee affiliated with the Center for Free Thought Equality, which is part of the American Humanist Association, we actually kept tabs on this. And Den is going to share with you a link so you could see this for yourself. And we'll post this in the show notes. underneath the video. Let me share with you this right here. This is the spreadsheet of everyone. These at the top here, the green means they won their election. Purple means they lost their election. At the top here, you have members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. Then we have people who ran for Congress. Then you have people who ran for state house and state senate. And every single one of these people are openly non-religious. And I just want to zoom in on the non-religious label here, because this is fascinating. Look what labels these people use: atheist and secular humanist, agnostic, humanist, spiritual, but not religious, agnostic atheist. There's some really interesting ones here. Non-practicing Catholic, whatever that means. No religion, culturally Jewish, wink, wink, basically. Unitarian Universalist, and a pagan atheist and humanist. These people are all openly non-religious. They all won their primaries earlier in the year, and they were all on the ballot. And I just want you to look for at the state level, state house, state senate. Look at all the greens on this list, the green colors, because they won their races. And I know you see a lot of purple as well. But guess what? A lot of those people in purple are challengers. They're not the incumbents. They just said, I want to run because I don't want this seat to go unopposed. I'm going to put up a fight. It's normal that they lost. That's okay. That's not weird. There's so much green on here that it's really encouraging. And so you could scroll through that at your leisure, but let me show you some of the highlights that I think is interesting. The first is that all these people are openly non-religious. I did not see evidence of their opponents using that against them, with one exception, which I shared with you a couple weeks ago in Florida. There was a House candidate named Sarah Henry. Outside of that one case, I don't think atheism was used as an attack on any of those candidates, which I find fascinating because it absolutely would have been something they used against that person 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So that's interesting. What are the numbers? This is from the Center for Free Thought Equality. They gave me these numbers. Before 2016, there were 5 elected officials serving in state legislatures who were openly non-religious. 5. In 2016, it grew to 17. In 2018, it grew to 47. In 2020, it was 63. In 2022, it was 72. And as of today, that number is at least 77, with a couple races that have not been called yet. So there are more openly non-theistic, non-religious candidates serving in state house or state senate. There are more this coming season than we have ever seen in American history. That's incredible. To go from virtually no openly non-theistic public officials a decade ago or so, maybe 2 decades ago, to this many, that is mind-blowing. That's not just a shift in culture. It's a huge testament to all the groups that really work to make that happen. So that's amazing. What else do you need to know? Well, if you go to the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, that is the caucus in DC with about 24 people. Jared Huffman, the congressman from California, he's openly humanist. He's non-theistic. He's the co-chair with Jamie Raskin. They have a caucus that says we're working for church-state separation, and we want to fight against religious discrimination against atheists, and we support reason-based legislation. Well, of all of those people in the Free Thought Caucus, which you think these are members of Congress, they're running big races, lots of money at stake, surely someone is going to use their membership in this caucus against them. Well, take a look. All of those members won, with one exception, and it was Representative Susan Wild from Pennsylvania, and this is what happened in her race. This is in Pennsylvania where we saw that little bit of a red shift this year. She lost by about 1.5%. Now, she did not lose because she was part of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. She lost because it was always a swing district and it was a tough race. But that's it. Every other member of the CFC won their re-election bid. That's hopeful. Like, I hope more people join the CFC now that they know it's not going to be used against them. What about the people who ran for Congress? There were 7 atheists, non-theists, who ran for Congress. They were the Democrats on the ballot against these Republicans. Well, they went 0 for 7. But that doesn't mean it was a worthless cause. Because if they didn't run, it's possible those Republicans would have just skated to victory unopposed. And that's not right. You want to give people someone to vote for. Also, by running and giving voters an opportunity to vote for someone instead of leaving that, option blank, they might have even galvanized more support at the top of the ticket and other members, other Democrats who were on the ballot. Like sometimes we talk about coattails. People were so excited to vote for maybe Kamala Harris or Barack Obama that they actually ended up voting for Democrats up and down the line. Well, this is reverse coattails. Maybe even in a ruby red district, you put a Democrat on the ballot, give people someone to vote for, and while they're there, they might also vote for Kamala Harris or whoever other Democrats are on the ballot. So I appreciate that 7 people ran for Congress, hard races in very red districts, and the fact that they lost doesn't mean that was worthless. I like that. Maybe some of you are wondering, are there any Republicans on the list? There are actually 2 Republicans on the list. One of them is a Colorado state representative. His name is Ryan Armagost. And he actually said in an interview a while back that he's an agnostic, but he does believe in a higher power. Okay, whatever. Armagost ran for re-election. He actually won very comfortably against a Democrat in Colorado. So he is probably the only openly non-religious, or at least explicitly non-religious Republican I can think of. There's actually one other guy, Brandon Finney of New Hampshire. This is a guy who used to be a Republican. Then he decided to leave the Republican Party and become a libertarian. Then he lost his re-election bid because no one votes for libertarians. And then he switched back to being a Republican because what principles don't matter anymore, right? And in 2020, he won the election again. So, and by the way, that time, 2022, as a brand new Republican, he won by 15 votes, 1-5. So I went to check back on him. How's he doing during this election? Here is that election result. He's actually losing his race. I believe that is 90 votes with everything in. I believe Amy Malone just got the check mark. So he lost this time around by 90 votes. That means there's only one openly non-religious Republican in state or federal office. All right. And I want to leave you with one last story here. I mentioned Sarah Henry. I made a video about Sarah Henry a week or 2 ago, so I won't rehash the whole thing. But I do want to tell you something about this. I mentioned Sarah is this Democrat from Florida who was running for a seat in the Florida State House. She previously worked for the American Humanist Association. And 2 years ago, she decided to be one of those people who said, I am not letting this Republican just run unopposed. I'm going to challenge him. And she ended up getting really close. She lost by a very, very small margin. And so she decided 2 years ago, I'm not giving up. I'm going to try again because I came close. I know more now. I have experience. I'm going to try to beat this guy again in 2 years. And Sarah's background is that she worked for the American Humanist Association. She was involved with some church-state separation groups, non-theistic groups. And this time around, unlike the first time, they very much tried to use her humanist affiliation against her. And again, I made a video about this, so I'm not going to rehash everything, but they said this Sarah Henry had spoken out against Christian nationalism. So Republicans are like, she hates Christianity. And Sarah spoke out against state-sponsored displays of religion, like a state-funded Christian cross on public property. And they were like, she hates Christian symbols. And she also said it's unfair for public school football coaches, something like that, to pray with their students on the team because that's coercive. And so they said, Sarah hates prayer, stuff like that. And they ran attack ads, commercials, mailers said that. And as I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned this, but here's how that race ended up going. Okay, this is the outcome of that race. Sarah lost. It was really close. I feel horrible for her, but look at that margin. In a really big election, she lost by under 1% of the vote. She actually did better this time around, not just in terms of raw votes, because it's an election year, so more people voted, but she got a higher percentage in a two-way race than she did 2 years ago. So despite all the attacks against her, she actually did better this time around, which is a testament to who she is and how these races go in general. And the story I want to tell you about this, it's, I think, a quick one. In 2016, in Tennessee, something similar happened. There was a state Senate race in a very red part of Tennessee. And a woman named Gail Jordan, who directed a group called Recovering from Religion, decided she's not letting this Republican run unopposed. She wanted to jump into the race. Seems kind of futile, right? But she didn't think it was right for this guy to run unopposed. And guess what? She lost. Absolutely lost. She lost by about 50 percentage points. It was like 75 to 25 right there. Did that make her a bad candidate? Absolutely not, because a Jesus loving Democrat would not have fared much better. You know what I mean? But here's where it gets interesting. So she loses by 50 percentage points. Well, the Republican who beat her then got tapped to serve in the Trump administration. So that guy leaves. So there's a special election to fill that seat about 2 years later, maybe a year and a half later. So Gail decides to run again. And you would think you could run any Republican with a pulse and they will demolish any Democrat. And yet, in that special election against a different Republican, it was a very different story. The Tennessee Republican Party waged a smear campaign against Gail. They drew attention to her non-religious beliefs. They called her a radical atheist. The lieutenant governor of Tennessee called her dangerous. They sent out flyers calling her kooky. She made some joke on Facebook. She had officiated a same-sex wedding, and she made a joke when she posted a picture online because it's really cute. She had this picture of her and the couple, and they took that out of context to suggest she was a traitor to America. And by the way, in that case, they used that picture with the same-sex couple in it, and it actually triggered the PTSD of one of those guys who happened to serve in the military. That's what the Republicans did in a race that they were almost guaranteed to win against Gail Jordan. So they did all of that, and guess what happened in that special election? Well, Gail still lost because it was a ruby red seat, but this time she lost by 42 points. So she improved on her performance from a year and a half prior to that, even though there were all these attacks against her for being an atheist. And that's what happened in Sarah's case as well this time around. And I know it's a hollow victory because none of that is a victory. But what that tells me is that if you're a good candidate, your non-theistic background is not going to hold you back anymore. There might be other forces in effect that make it really hard to win a race, but you're not going to win or lose because you're an atheist. You know, you're winning or losing for other reasons. And I think for a long time, you could not get elected dog catcher if anyone knew you were an atheist. And what we are now seeing is there were like 150 candidates who were atheists on the ballot, and like 77 plus won their races, even though it was very public that they were openly non-religious. That is a good sign. I think that is important. Atheists deserve to have our views reflected in our nation's representatives, not just because we're a growing part of the country, but because we're good people in general. Not all of us. See Richard Dawkins. We think good policy stems from reason and science and facts and compassion, hopefully, and a desire to fix our problems, because there's no afterlife and no higher power that's going to fix everything for us. So you want those people in office, generally speaking. And that means if you're an atheist and you're thinking about running for school board or city council, you should do it. Don't shy away from it just because you're non-religious and you've spoken out about that, because it's easy to defend that. If you're anti everyone religious, okay, don't run. But if you're an atheist who thinks it's reasonable, there's nothing holding you back. It doesn't have to. So I hope the ones who got elected will use their new platforms to at least, push back against Christian nationalism and become loud, proud opponents of this attempt to Christianize our nation. Yeah, I'm going to stop there for now. Let's take some questions here. Oh, thank you for that donation. Thanks for what you do. I just subscribed to your newsletter. Thank you and thoroughly enjoy it. Also, a while back, one of your live streams inspired me to contact my representative. We'll be doing that again. That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Hulana.